For the second time in 20 years, Japan has beaten the Soviet bear. This time was different. Through some fortunate events that were outside of my control and a couple of unfortunate ones, including the death of an admiral, I was recently promoted to commander and given more powers over the Navy's construction bureau. Although I've been busying myself with designs of the next generation of cruisers, battleships, and battlecruisers, I did find time, as always, to discuss with the Emperor, who suggested at one point that I should probably try to settle down at some point. I expressed that my duty to him and Japan as a whole took priority, but he insisted that perhaps finding a wife might not be a bad idea, so I began looking. Eventually, someone caught my eye. Mako, from my home village. She was of a farmer's family, but she was incredibly intelligent, and her grandfather, who had made some money during land purchases and had become a businessman, had enough money to send her off to a girls' school in Tokyo. I met her while walking through a shop one day, and she had struck my eye. We quickly formed a friendship, and I began to court her. Alexander and the others were overjoyed to see that I had found someone. What surprised them even more is, despite them seeing her as possibly the traditional Japanese housewife, she actually was more intelligent than they thought. Nothing against them, of course. They weren't expecting her to come out slinging arrows as if she was one of us, hardened by the fact that she had multiple brothers who she was very close with, including a twin. It was very recently that I decided to propose, and we got married. The gentlemen, my friends, and including the Emperor, even suggested I take some time off, and it took a direct order from the Emperor for me to take time off to enjoy my new familial life. In the meantime, I guess the more pressing matter, outside of my personal life, is the end of the Soviet-Japanese War, or rather the second. There was a turning point in the Second War that really stuck with me. The Second Battle of Vladivostok. 7 Soviet battleships went down. 7. The news traveled around the world like wildfire. Perhaps more than I could possibly imagine. It took some time for us to actually confirm the reports, but as they came in, yes, the Japanese Navy had just sunk, or critically damaged beyond repair, 7 battleships. A few surrendered due to crew loss and were given time to allow their crews to abandon ship, and then they were sunk. The loss of almost the rest of the torpedo boat fleet had me thinking about preservation. I have made it a goal that every new ship that we build, we keep one member of the class that has seen service, and we place them in a museum. It was decided that we should put them in the capital, as floating museums to teach about naval history, and allow the public to view them. Originally, it was going to be a Navy operation, although it is now a cooperation with the civilian government. I must say I was very surprised to see how successful it's been. We've only recently begun opening them up for tours, but they've been successful. These initial tours, before we go on decommissioning them from the naval registry, have been quite successful. A popular one, surprisingly, is the torpedo boat Tsubame, the last survivor of her class, who has become a bit of an underdog favorite in the Japanese papers. However, my focus moves towards the future. The civilian government and the new Prime Minister have been very concerned about trouble on the horizon. It seems that, while I have not made regular entries about the world politics in my journal, something happened in China. The unified Republican government that was set up after the fall of the Qing Empire and the subsequent Civil War, under one Dr. Sun Yat-sen, has collapsed. The government and her allies fled across the border into ours and the British zones in China. I reached a deal with the British and the Chinese government to form temporary occupation zones to keep the industrial heartland of China out of the hands of the communists, who have set up temporary bases in Indonesia, which no one has been able to push them off of. They still have the interior, which is controlled by guerrilla forces and militia, which no one is able to quite pacify yet. It seems will be required to take them out. In the Philippines. Total victory is never an assured thing, but sending 7 Russian battleships to the bottom of the Sea of Japan and the Sea of Okhotsk in the Straits near Vladivostok seems very telling. The Soviet Union is on the back foot, and most other navies that we once thought we would have to spar with are down to maybe 40 ships that we know of. The question is, what's next? The Prime Minister called me aside after meeting with the Emperor and asked me to brief him on all naval matters, which is technically my duty. He asked if I had seen combat. I said I had. I'd gone out with the fleet, mainly the Fuzo and her task force, at the Battle of the Kuro Islands, and I don't like to brag, but first I was responsible for asking the CL Natori and Kashi. When I say CL, I apologize to my non-naval friends. It means light cruiser. I had them go rescue the crews of the Kuma, Kashima, and Kashiwara, and personally oversaw the Naka, Fuji, Choyo, and Fuzo in combat, as not quite an officer, but an officer nonetheless, as I'm still in the Navy. However, because of my actions, I was put up for a medal, and while I profusely tried to turn it down and state that it was just doing my duty, it was forced upon me. Lucky me. But it had me thinking. When the Prime Minister asked a simple question, who do we need to be aware of? Who's the biggest threat? I told him I'd get back to him, and so I went back to my friends. We paced the room for some time, not quite landing on sufficient answers, which was not helpful to anyone. I sat down with the group of the foreign friends I've made, which still didn't help. No one could quite think of an answer. Who was the biggest threat? Naturally, we started pointing fingers across the table in some jest and, well, some truth. James suggested that, quite frankly, if the British were not in a almost perfect alliance with Japan, it would be Britain. William, on the other hand, or Billy, argued against it. He said that Italy and France still had navies, and we should be aware of it. Alexander disagreed and said that the rising communist forces, if they were able to somehow wreak control or destroy the railroads being built in China to help connect and industrialize the nation, to one day be free as its own country again, could be more destructive. I laid out my answers the next day to the Prime Minister, who somewhat agreed with my assessment, but he said that the government was interested in forming an alliance with the Austro-Hungarians, which is strange. The Empire has been through 3 revolts in the last 20 years, now under a federalist system like the United States, although still a monarchy. I don't think I want to get involved in that. Our protectorates, meanwhile, that we've established after the Soviet War, have been successful. The Shah of Iran, who was being held under house arrest ever since the Soviet conquest, putting a communist government in charge, who was nearly killed if it had not been for Japanese troops and local volunteers who hated the Soviets. Spoiler alert, it was most of the population, freed him. Next up was Iraq, where the newly freed Imperial Iranian Army and our forces, including the Marines, landed and quickly subdued it. Eventually we decided to establish another protectorate, like the United Kingdom does with her colonies, as dominions. Iraq's king was put back on the throne and freed from possible death. King Saud of Arabia had been fighting a civil war. Eventually, the Soviets were able to somehow swap territory, where the territory that was once under Soviet control and Saud's control flipped. Well, at least that's what we thought. It turns out the communists weren't that interested in fighting in Arabia. The part of Arabia, however, that is causing problems for us is the fact that it's being controlled by highly motivated rebels who are being funded by someone? We're not sure who, but they do have some control over the rail lines leading to Mecca and Medina, which is, as you can guess, causing problems in the Islamic world. Meanwhile, Europe is still being a conflagration of interests and old rivalries. Germany has stretched her influence all the way deep into Russia. Her controlled territories are under the supervision of another Commonwealth system, much like ours. It seems that we are somehow aligned, not as matters of national interest, but the Brits, the Germans, and ourselves have been strangely coinciding with each other over how to deal with the communist threats. I've asked the Prime Minister to conduct a meeting, secretly. I don't want the other nations finding out we're doing this. I'm asking the three of us, our three nations, its leaders, to sit down in a room, along with the most influential military men, and hash out a plan. All of us, it seems, fear the same thing. If Russia counterattacks, they could break the German hold over the most industrialized regions and wreak havoc. They've already taken northern Norway, and the Norwegians up there are forced south, trying to defend their capital. Sweden got overrun, and it's only a matter of time. Spheres of influence might be the only thing that could save us. America is already doing that in her hemisphere and in southern Asia, where we have struck up a deal of non-interference and helping to support the Americans any way we can. They are also dealing with groups. Their funders, we don't know. However, something does concern me that there is a naval buildup in some areas, and word has it that Tonkin has been seized from the French by the Chinese communists. It's right on the border of the British-controlled areas of China. Seems I might have my work cut out for me if another war doesn't come up first to dash my plans. In the meantime, this journal's going to be empty for a few days, as I'm going away to the countryside. Finally get some rest and relaxation over these past few months designing new ships. I trust the design bureau will be able to handle things, and quite frankly, I could use a break, especially considering that I'm now married and I should probably be more tuned to my wife's needs. She did say I could use a break and that I looked too tired, and she chided me for drinking too much coffee. I suppose I should listen to her. She probably has a point. Because if war comes, well, I need to be ready.